me just greet the leadership of the NCOP and the members. In the interest of time, greet all the deputy ministers who are here, the leadership of the National Assembly, and the leadership of the National House of Traditional and Nkosazana leaders, the religious leaders, and most importantly, civil society and the delegates of the Men's Parliament and the boys. Thank you for inviting us to join today in this collective quest to continue institutionalizing a responsive men's movement to address the issues which directly impact on the moral fiber of our society. We're gathered in this week when we will be kicking off the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence campaign on Friday, the 25th of November, which is a global campaign towards galvanizing all of society against the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. Unfortunately, South Africa and the world over has seen unprecedented increase in the cases of gender-based violence and femicide. The most recent crime statistics released by South African Police Service for the second quarter of this financial year paint a harrowing picture. From July to September 2022, 897 women were murdered in South Africa. Over 13,000 cases of domestic violence were reported. A tally of over 9,500 rape cases were opened with the South African police. The women and children of South Africa are not safe. We are not safe. These numbers are an indictment on our moral standing as a nation. I make this harsh statement on the moral standing of our nation because it is an indictment of an indication of the extent of our departure from our African values of Ubuntu and human decency. I was happy that the young prince took us back to Ubuntu, because what he was talking about was Ubuntu, which is our core value. And we have departed from it. Because from time immemorial, nations have placed great value in the protection of women and children. This is particularly to the extent that even in times of war, women and children were not supposed to be harmed. Yet today, women and children are butchered as though it is a sport by the very men who are inherently supposed to protect them. Something is wrong and very wrong in our society. Honorable Chairperson, we continue to make the clarion call we made as we launched the traditional men's parliament, that men need to be an integral agents of change and active partners in the fight against the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. I'm glad that you are here, but the problem is big out there, and I don't think we should underestimate it. But of course, in attempts to understand the reasons for the prevalence of violence in our society, and in order to make any meaningful impact towards addressing the violence which is in great part affects women and children, we need to understand the root causes. Some have been explained during this session. And anger, why are we angry? Men feel inadequate. And I think it goes back to what was said, that men feel they must be protectors and providers. And when they cannot protect or provide, they feel angry, they feel inadequate. And that affects their demeanor towards everybody. And we must fight against violence against women, but also just violence in our society, because we're a very violent society. And we can't defeat GBV in the presence of general violence in society. So we must fight both in parallel, fight violence in society and fight violence against women. Of course, we're also a very unequal society. We're one of the most unequal societies in the world. And we know, research shows that very unequal societies have very severe violence, especially have got very high rates of violence. So we have to look at all those things. We have more than 9 million young people between the ages of 15 and 34. Maybe now there are more. This is statistics before the last census, who are not in education, not in training, not in employment. That must also be a big factor. And of course, poverty, unemployment, inequality, violent crime follows that. But let me also say that research has been conducted to understand men, inherently held definitions of masculinity and their relationship to the violence we see every day in the news, that another woman, another child has been abducted, violated, brutally killed. According to research by the Safety and Violence Initiative, notions of masculinity, it means to be, what it means to be a man. I think somebody also spoke about that earlier. Seem to be the driving factor behind much of the frightful behavior that males engage in. According to the various studies by this knowledge hub, young men have identified violence as a characteristic means to display power and to prove their masculinity with those close to them and in their communities. As somebody was saying, if you step on somebody's toe, they must show power and sort you out. It's also something that men use to control women. They've decided that violence is a means to control women. And also the media and society has given the impression that men own us, that they own women. You can't own a human being. Nobody owns a human being. Those things were done by the slave owners. And it's a crime against humanity. So, but this is one of the problems. But also it is worth noting that the generally held understanding of masculinity and femininity is not a natural occurrence, but is a collective gender identity that is socially constructed. These notions of masculinity and femininity are enforced by the values we entrench in various social spaces and interactions. Just to name a few, the gendering of roles in our children within our homes. I think somebody spoke about that. And that entrenches the misogynic and patriarchal beliefs. For example, male children tend to be treated as princes, Nkosazana, and they must be served by their female siblings. And that is wrong. Uyafika nje ubungane endlini or whoever. Nomsa, ngenzela itiye. How? Kwenze njani? And the parents keep quiet. Instead of saying, "Aye, if you want tea, make tea and ask us if we want tea." And it's important what happens at home because adults bring back to society what society taught them as children. So that's one of the things. But also, I've attended lots of weddings and I always get dismayed because they counsel the young bride about how to behave. But nobody tells the men how to behave. They are just left to their own devices. But the woman is taught, you must persevere, you must be submissive, you must not talk about your problems until you die. So I think those things must change, and the religious leaders must also, when they counsel people who are going to get married, counsel them properly. And at home, we must counsel our bride and bridegrooms properly. Mina nje angitshela ingane yami ney'ngane eziwu-4 zamantombazane ayikho engitshela ukuthi ibekezele. Lelo gama nje labekezela likho. Uzobekezela kuze kube nini? Uzobekezela zaphuma eseyibhokisi. Ungayikhuluma into eyenzeka phakathi kwendlu yakho. Uyashaywa, uyakhahlelwa, ungakhulumi. Hayi. No, obaba, obhuti, abakhusele. Amadoda awakhusela amakhosikazi. Ungayishaya inkosikazi. If the worst comes to the worst, itshela ukuthi ayihambe. Iphila. But of course, I think that one of the speakers was also correct that we must empower women to be able to walk away from a toxic situation. And that's why there must be equality in opportunities, in education, in jobs, in positions, in everything. Our constitution says so. But we come from a society where women couldn't even couldn't even have an overdraft without a man coming to sign for him or her. The Natal Code, that's where I come from. Where a woman was a minor, kufanele uyosayinela umfana wakho ungasebenzi wena usebenza.
Actually.
So that was a problem. We must get out of that. And I want to quote the late Samora Machel, what he said about women and their emancipation. And I quote, "The emancipation of women is not an act of charity, the result of a humanitarian or compassionate attitude. The liberation of women is a fundamental necessity for the revolution, the guarantee of its continuity, and the precondition of its victory. There's no revolution that can be victorious without truly emancipating women. And at the same time, OR said no country can boast of being free until its women are free. Are we free? Is South Africa free? Okay. Now let's move on. Umamusulu once said, women are the people who are going to relieve us from all this oppression and depression. The rent boycott that is happening in Soweto now, this was in the 80s, is alive because of the women. It is the women who are on the street committees, educating the people to stand up and protect each other. So we need to work together as equals, men and women, in our society, in our homes, with different roles, as has been said, but as equals. And we, as was said, we bring different strengths, and women are the actual foundation of the home, of communities. And if we kill them, we abuse them, what kind of communities are we going to build? So I'm glad that we're all here and talking the same language, but we all have to go back. As COCTA, we are advocating local economic development because we've realized that in the midst of poverty, in the midst of unemployment, young people go to the towns, to the cities, thinking they are going to get greener pastures. And when they get there, they swell the ranks of the urban poor. And of course, where there is poverty, unemployment, inequality, people have no place to stay, don't know what you're going to eat. If you don't know what you're going to eat, you'll end up being a criminal because you'll end up stealing bread from the shop so that you can eat. So, but let me come to the traditional leadership. I think at the National House of Traditional and Khoisan leaders, in cultivating a human culture based on values of care, support, and respect between both men and women, has a very important role. So in this regard, I'm glad that you are partnering with Parliament so that we can all work together in rooting out this sketch. But I want to challenge the traditional leaders. Each and every one of you, my leaders in your community, just say, we are not going to tolerate, zero tolerance to raping of women, to killing, abusing of women. If each and everyone said that in your village, and you said, if you do it, we don't need you here, and the next village says the same thing, you can't come here if you have left your village because you are abusing women. This will have a very big impact. So I'm challenging all of you. And I come from a rural area myself, and I know the role of traditional leaders is in Duna. You can't even, in my village, you can't bury on the same day. If there are 2 funerals, you can't. Who do you choose? There is law and order there. But why can't there be law and order around this issue? And around the issue of drugs, we should do the same thing. Because it's true, drugs, alcohol abuse contribute a lot to violence against women. And of course, I also agree, and I had it in my speech about that a child is raised by a village, not by just the parent. When I grew up in that village, lots of fathers were working in the mines, far away, but people didn't feel the fathers were away because the whole village looked after the children, not only in terms of discipline, but even in terms of food. You go and ask the next one who else they'll give you. But Ubuntu gelobo, it's our own indigenous system, which we have abandoned. I think we must go back to it. And a man who abuses, a boy who abuses a woman must know that there's zero tolerance. But also our traditions have never and do not promote any abuse of women and children. But there is a misinterpretation and misunderstanding now. And this English translation of ilobolo, bride price, what is that? Bride price. How can a bride have a price tag? Ilobolo, it's not a bride price. There is no price for a bride. It's a way of building relationship between the two families and appreciating that this family, has brought up this young woman who's going to come to this family to build a home. Let's forget about this bride price. And now the young people think, oh, ngimkhokhele, ngimthengile wami. Yam-owna ngamkhokhela ilobolo. No. Phela into mawe yakho i-own iglass yakho makuthi ibulala uyayishaya ibulala. We cannot be owned. We don't have a price tag. So before I can see she's looking at me, she's about to say, as we conclude. So let's work together. And we must also just work together, the three spheres, the three arms of the state, parliament, the judiciary, everyone, to fight this scourge. And I agree, we fought COVID together, let's fight this one together. So as I conclude, I again wish to thank the House for inviting us on this occasion. And we wish to take this opportunity to again call on men to be agents of change and to be partners in the socio-economic development of communities, improving health, preventing the scourge of gender-based violence, femicide, and all other social ills. I thank you.
Boy.